Hello folks, welcome to my YouTube channel Watercolor Impressions. It's springtime in Toronto and it's been sunny lately, and I was waiting in the stoplight and I saw this backlighting and I instantly want to capture the lighting in my painting. Before we go, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And let's get started, guys. Check my video description for the drawing template so you guys can download the drawing template and you can follow with me in this tutorial. Whenever I draw, I try to keep it really simple and just trying to block the major shapes. I'm not worried about anything else. I just want to see where everything sits, and it's the same thing I do in almost every painting, but I also try to keep it minimal as possible. And you can see I also add some darker spots for the street lights so I know that where the perspective is, and I also moved around certain stuff based on my reference and my drawing, because as a painter you're gonna tell a story and you're gonna create the elements which is compositionally pleasing to the viewer. I also reduced the scene of this painting to fair minimal because there is thousands of things happening in our reference, but I want to try to keep it simple as possible. Whenever you paint, that's a good way to go about it, because sometimes you don't lost in details. This painting is all about the people who are in the foreground and the shadows which is speaking through towards us. And I'm also adding that cyclist. He also a really good element for us. I usually don't use eraser that much, but I used it today because I want to make sure the foreground elements is really good as possible. And the other thing about adding people in your scene is it provides a scale for your painting as well. So people get an idea of like how big is certain stuff based on the people's scale. So we are at the final stage of our drawing, and I'm also adding the crossing lines as well. I'm making sure, even though it looks really loose, I'm making sure aware of my perspective, because the one thing you can't cheat on your drawing or painting is perspective, because people will get an idea of what's wrong in your painting. So I think we are about to start our first wash. And I also added another car on the left because that also gives a really good detail for us. And I'm trying to put add some perspective lines for the building in the foreground, because it's really good to see where the detail goes. And there's also no person who is super in the foreground, because I want to bring someone who's in the front. So I added that person, who is a little bit bigger than other people who are in the scene as well. And I did some directional lines on the road, and that's it. Let's jump on to our first wash. I always start with the sky. That's how watercolor works. You start with the light wash, and for the sky I almost use Cobalt Blue. I'm just gonna leave some white bits here and there to get some clouds. It's kind of surprising that Cobalt Blue is a really expensive tube for watercolors, because I think everybody uses Cobalt Blue for the sky. So I'm going to warm it up a little bit or make it lighter as it comes down. Wherever I left the white space, I'm just throwing some water because I want to get some loose edges in my painting as well. So as it comes down, I'm going to make it lighter, because the backlighting, which kind of gives a really good contrast against light sky. So I'm going to take it all the way to the foreground in the mid-tone, and I'm also painting against the people, but I'm making sure leaving some highlights for the shoulders on the head. And I'm also leaving some highlights for the crossing line, and I'm just going to bring that the sky wash all the way to the foreground. But as it comes to the foreground, I'm going to increase my pigment consistency and a little bit of warmth in my painting. And I'm also using Payne's gray, a little bit of burnt amber, and Winsor violet to have some color variation, because this helps us to take the viewer's eye to lead into the painting. So it's really important to have some foreground elements in any kind of painting I do. It's just an artist preference. And now I jumped onto the clouds. I'm adding a little bit of darker clouds against that white clouds, which I left some space for. So I'm trying to making it as impressionistic as possible and simple as possible, because I don't spend that much time on clouds or anything like that. So we are officially done with first wash in our painting. And let's start with the background. And for the background, I'm using Payne's gray and throwing a little bit of French Ultramarine blue and Cobalt blue. a little bit of Cerulean Blue, because I kind of have a mix of a lot of blue variations in our background building. And there's also a tree which is against the light sky, so it's going to be darker. So that's how backlighting works. It works against the light background, and we're going to have a darker contrast in front of them. You could see, even though the buildings are separated in our reference, I'm trying to make it as a single shape. That way it's easier for us to paint, as well as that's how traditional painting works. And at the bottom, I'm going to increase the pigment consistency. I'm also making sure I'm not going over the people at the bottom as well. And I'm leaving some white bits here and there, which I'll just leave it as it is, because it kind of also acts as highlights for objects or any kind of things in our painting. So the foreground building is a little bit complicated because it's reflecting the sky on the building. So I'll leave it as it is, and I'll just add some darker pigments here and there, and I'll call it a day. And that way we don't have to paint the reflection, because I already painted a little bit of cobalt blue on it, so we don't have to do it. And I'm also adding the details at the top of the painting, top of the building as well. And I'm also feeling that the background building got a little bit lighter. Yeah, maybe we'll take care of it at the end. Now let's focus on the roads on the midground building. So I'm trying to connect all the shapes from the midground, the foreground building, and everything to the road in the midground. So I'm adding some little bit of darker pigment here and there just to get some things going. So now let's focus on the objects in our scene. So I'm going to start with the car in the midground. And for that, I'm using French Ultramarine Blue and Peon's Gray. You could use any darker pigment, or else you can use any colors if you want. And I want to have a lot of... I felt that the foreground building is against the sky, which is kind of blends by itself. So I'm going to introduce a little bit of Cobalt Blue at the top, so I have some reflections. So as soon as we added that, you could see the foreground building came alive. And now I'm jumping onto the traffic lights. For the traffic light, I'm using a little bit of Cadmium Yellow and a little bit of yellow ochre in my brush, and I'm making sure the one on the right hand side is a little bit darker. So this is the one facing in front of us, so it's against the shadow, so I'm going to have a little bit of darker pigment there. And now I'm adding the street poles. And in Toronto, wherever there's a street pole and there is a street light at the bottom which is black in color, and they have some street lights in it. Being said that, the only thing that scares me till this day, I've been painting for a long time now, till this day it scares me, is doing straight lines in watercolors or in painting. I usually mess up the lines. It just makes me so mad whenever I try to make straight lines. So I'm trying to add some darker details here and there. And now I'm adding the street pole in the front. In the front pole, I did have a really hard time doing this. I messed up my straight line, but still I was able to get a straight as much as possible, and I just leave it as it is. So now let's jump on to the figures in the foreground. So for the figures, since they are against the glow on the ground, I'm going to make it as dark as possible. Even though I painted a little bit darker, I think I have to glaze over after it dries out, because watercolor tends to dry out and gives a lighter value after like 5 minutes. So I'm trying to take pigment consistency without any water in it, and there's like a lot of details I'm trying to add as well. And I'm also trying to have a little bit of colorations in the figure too, so it also creates a little bit of it avoids a little bit of monotonous in our painting. I'm also making sure some people are walking, some people are in walkable motion. And this figure this is our major figure. I want to make sure that he stands out from any other figure in the crossing line, but I made it as dark as possible for that figure. And I also left some eyelets, so I don't have to paint eyelets for him later. So now I'm jumped onto the figure on the left hand side, and making sure for the faces I usually use cadmium orange and a little bit of amber in it. So since it's a sunny day, so their face is going to be a little bit lighter and brighter in value, so I want to make sure that I added that. And now So whenever you add car, make sure that you have that darker shadow underneath it, so that anchors the car in the ground. And on the left hand side of the foreground building, it is super lighter in the value, so I'm just adding a little bit of values in there. And I'm also adding a little bit of, since I have like a little bit of white paint in my brush, I'm just throwing some highlights here and there just to bring back some of the highlights in our painting. And I also felt that the road is super light, and I'm going to be glazing over with another value later. And now I'm adding the hair for the people. For that I'm using Payne's gray, and now they are blending in the background building and in other objects in our painting. But eventually when we add highlights with the white paint, they will come in the front, in the foreground. So I'm trying to put some love on the figures here and there because I want to make sure that they read really good, because the painting is all about them. So as I said, the ground is got a little bit lighter in the value. So what I'm going to do, I'm trying to add some a little bit of value on the ground. I hate doing this step because it kind of ruins my the figures in the painting. But sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do, and this also helps us to bring the crossing lights a little bit better in the foreground, and that's the other reason I add that as well. But the rest I'm gonna keep it as it is, and yeah, I'll blend this the new value in the foreground as well. I make sure that it blends properly. So the figure in the foreground, it kind of got lighter, so I'm using another glaze over with Payne's gray just to get some darker value in there. Now I'm adding, since I have the darker pigment in my brush, so I'm going to add it in the street lights too. And I looked at my reference again. I realized that the background horizon is a little bit higher compared to what I did now, so I'm just lowering it. It just one single step, it just like bringing the bottom part, the cyclist, a little bit better. So that really helped, and it also tilted our perspective a little bit better. And I want to make sure that it's darker at the bottom, because this painting is all about the backlighting, so I want to make sure that I get that. I'm trying to blend and put some values here and there just to have some color variations. So now I'm going to add some, it looks a lot of blue in our scene, so even though there is no fire hydrant, I'm just adding on the left and right hand side just to have a little bit of color variations in our scene. And now I'm connecting the road in the foreground. So I think we are in a good shape in our painting now, and now what we can do is, it's a matter of adding so now wires here and there, even though in our reference it didn't have that much wires, but I'm adding it because it kind of like shows that it's kind of downtown. It just brings the vibe of the downtown in the painting. And I love using that brush because it gives this crisp lines and thin lines. Before I used to paint with a smaller brush. I hate like when I do thicker lines for the wires, and it helped me a lot as soon as I changed to this brush. And now it's a matter of adding some shadows for the people in the foreground. For the shadows, you could mix anything with French Ultramarine blue and a little bit of purple in it, and that explains a little bit of shadows for that. And as soon as we add the shadows, you could see the whole painting came alive. And I want to make sure I get that shadow as dark as possible, because that will bring everything in the foreground. And you could see I also added the shadow on the foreground light, which is at the top. And I'm also adding some, since I have a darker pigment in my brush, I'm trying to add some darker pigment for the people in the front as well. And I think we are good with the shadows now. Maybe I also see in the background building there's also a smoke coming out of the building, so I'm also adding that as well. And I think it's a matter of fact we should go ahead and add some highlights in our painting. So for adding eyelets, you could either use Chinese white or you could use gouache. It's up to the artist's preference, but sometimes I use Chinese white, sometimes I use gouache. It's up to artist preference as well. So you could see I'm bringing some of the eyelets. As I said, as soon as we put the eyelets on the people's head, you could see they come in the foreground eventually. And I'm also trying to bring some eyelets at the back, and even though the person in the foreground didn't have any hat, I just added them just to have some detail in his head. And so this step you could do however you want it. There is not the right or wrong step for this. If you want to bring some lot of details from the reference, you could do it, or else you can squint your eyes and it will show where to put your eyelets everywhere. I think like as soon as we put the eyelets, the whole painting came alive. And I will keep building this detail till I'm happy with it. There is not like a right or wrong when you do this eyelet part, but it's up to artist preference. Now I'll just go ahead and add some more details I see on the street poles and everything. So now I'm adding the street lights. For the street lights, I'm using cadmium red and a little bit of white paint in it. And you can also see I also added that red in the foreground as well, so it kind of creates color harmony in our picture. And as soon as we added that red light, it also shows that it brought some details back. And even though there is no yellow cross line in my reference, but I added that because I wanted to have a little bit of color variation in our painting. And since I have white paint in my brush, I'm trying to, wherever I see darker parts, I'm going to put a little bit of white paint in it so that it breaks the darkest part in our painting. And since I have white paint in my brush, I also added that on the top of the building, so it also creates a little bit of light peeking through. So when I squint my eyes, when I see the reference, the cloud got super light, and I want to have a little bit of shadow and a little bit of volume in my in the cloud. So I'm kind of adding that and breaking that clouds a little bit better in our scene. Thanks again for watching this backside lighting video tutorial with me. Let me know what you guys learned from this video and what's your favorite color in this painting. If you have any other questions or subjects you want me to cover in watercolors, write me at watercolorimpressions@gmail.com. Before you go, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And please do share with your friends and family. And good luck with your painting, folks.